Hi, my name is Gloria Roberts. Today, we are discussing the topic sexual reproduction in plants. But our major focus here shall be on double fertilization in plants. Objectives of lesson. As the lesson progresses, the learners should be able to 1. Define fertilization. 2. State parts of the structure of the pollen grain and the ovule. 3. Mention the steps involved in the process of double fertilization in plants. And 4. State what happens to the embryo at the end of the process of fertilization. Now take note that plants can also carry out sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction takes place in higher plants or in flowering plants. The structure where the plant's male and the female reproductive organs are found is called the flower. So the flower is defined as the reproductive structure or organ of a flowering plant. So here we have an image of a flower. Take a look. Also take note that fertilization in plant takes place after pollination had occurred in a flower. You can check the video on pollination. Now, pollination is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther of a flower to the stigma of a flower. Pollination is a form of reproductive behavior in plant. Fertilization in plant is the fusion of pollen grain and the ovum in a flower in order to form zygote. So we can define fertilization in plants as the fusion of pollen grain and the ovum in the flower in order to form zygote. Fertilization occurs twice at the same time in a flowering plant, thus the term double fertilization in flowering plants. So let's look at the structure of the pollen grain. The pollen grains are the male gametes or reproductive sex cells of the flowering plants. Pollen grains exist in different shapes, colors, and even sizes. They are located in the anther of a flower. Structurally, the pollen grain consists of the following parts. Number 1, exine, which is the outer membrane. 2, intine, which is the inner membrane. It also has a cytoplasm. And lastly, number 4, the nucleus. The nucleus is the part that contains the genes or the DNA of the male part of the flower. So here we have images showing the external view of the pollen grain and the internal view of the pollen grain. Please take note of the external and the internal structure. Now the outer part is the enzyme, the internal part is the intine. We have the cytoplasm, the nucleus, and the germ. You should be able to draw this and label well. Good. As a student, should be able to draw and label well. So let's move on. Let's look at the structure of the ovule. The ovules are located inside the ovary. Structurally, ovule consists of the following parts. The first part here is integument. Now, this is the outer covering of the ovule. Now, the ileum, which attaches the ovule to the placenta. We have the micropyle, which is an opening for passage of the pollen tube. It's a hole that allows pollen tube to enter into the ovule. Then we have the nucellus, which nourishes the ovule. And then we have the embryo sac, which is the site of the ovum, and the secondary nucleus, which are the female gametes or reproductive sex cells of the female part of the flower. So let's look at how it looks like. Structure of an ovule. You can see the first image here is showing the ovule in the ovary. So projecting the ovule, just take note of the part labeled egg, the part labeled secondary nucleus, and the part labeled micropyle. We shall be talking about them later. Alright, let's move on. Now let's look at the processes involved in the process of fertilization in plants. Step 1, pollen grains fall on the stigma in a process called pollination. Now the pollen grains absorb the sugary liquid material on the stigma in order to break open the outer membrane or the exine of the pollen grain. So here we have images of pollen grains falling on the stigma of a flower. So step 2, the nucleus inside the pollen grain divides into two. Yes, it divides into a smaller generative nucleus and a larger tube nucleus. So it divides into generative nucleus and tube nucleus. Step 3 now, the generative nucleus further divides into two nuclei, which are now the male gametes, while the tube nucleus enables the pollen tube to grow longer. So here we have images representing step 2 and step 3. And the first one, we have the nucleus dividing into two. Don't forget, it divides into generative nucleus and the tube nucleus. Okay, the second one in front, we have the generative nucleus further dividing into two, which are now the two male nuclei or the two sperm nuclei. And so we also have the tube nucleus, which allows the pollen tube to grow downward. Okay, let's continue with that. And so we are looking at step 4. The pollen tube grows down through the style until it reaches the ovule in the ovary. It enters the ovule through the micropyle. You know, I told you to take note of the micropyle. It's a hole that allows the pollen tube to get to the ovule or the embryo sac. Okay, step 5, the ovary contains one or more ovules, of which each contains an ovum and a secondary or definitive nucleus. Now, one of the pollen nuclei, okay, that means the sperm or the male gamete that has been formed, one will fuse with the ovum to form a zygote. That is the first fertilization process. Now, step 6, the second male gamete or nuclei will fuse with the secondary or definitive nucleus to form the endospermic nucleus, which will later form the endosperm. And at this time, the secondary fertilization has taken place. So you can see the image of the pollen tube going straight to meet the female gametes in the flower. Okay, so let's move to the development of an embryo. So what happened to the embryo that is formed at the end of fertilization? Now, at the end of fertilization process, the ovary will develop into the fruit, while the ovule will become the seed. Take note that the number of ovules in an ovary determines the number of seeds that will be found in that fruit. Don't forget, the ovary will develop into the fruit, while the ovule or ovules inside the ovary will develop into the seed or seeds. So when you are taking an orange or any other fruit, take note that that fruit you are eating is developed from the ovary, and the seed inside the fruit is developed from the ovule. So the endosperm that will be formed, the endosperm serves as food for endospermic plants during germination. Plants such as maize, millet, and the rest, they are called endospermic plants. You can check that in the video on germination. All right, don't forget, the endosperm serves as food for endospermic plants during germination. So at this time, we've come to the end of the class. We have student activity for you to test your mastery of this topic. So 10 questions for 10 seconds, 10, okay, or 10 minutes. Okay, let's say 10 minutes. All right, so it's time for you to go through the question quickly. If you don't understand or you're not able to answer any, don't worry, go back to the video, listen to it again, download it if you have to, view it as many times as possible, and at the end, I believe you'll be able to tackle all these questions and even more. Yeah, the answers to the students' activity. Is time for marking. I love this part because our major focus here is 100%. Okay, have you finished marking? Did you get it all? That is our goal, 100%. Okay, at this moment, I'll say thank you for joining me in this class. Thank you for learning today.